Tonya Craft was one of the most trusted people in the tiny town of Chickanauga, Georgia, a beloved, beautiful kindergarten teacher with 2 small kids of her own. Parents here felt great comfort sending their precious children to the safety of her class. Tonya would protect them, or so they thought.
The last day of school, actually the first day of summer, came, and we were going to the swimming pool, and 2 detectives knocked on my door.
Tonya Craft had about 20 years' experience under her belt, but nothing could have prepared her for what those 2 detectives told her.
They started throwing accusations that I had molested 3 young girls, and at the same time my children were at home. A friend of theirs was at the house, and I was just trying to wrap my mind around what they were saying and the accusations they were throwing at me.
The cops left, and somehow Tonya kept her wits about her. She called a lawyer who phoned investigators, but the cops were playing hardball.
And when they called me back, they said that I was not cooperating, they were going to arrest me. I was refusing to speak to them, and I said, that is absolutely not true. My attorney has tried to contact you, and they said, we don't work for your attorney, so I guess we're going to come arrest you. And I said, I will talk to you, but I will not talk to you without an attorney present.
Sum it up for me. What were the next 2 weeks like for you?
The next 2 weeks were hope, disbelief, hell. I went from thinking there is no way that I could get arrested if I hadn't done anything wrong. A lot of prayer. I had friends that came over, and we actually had a meeting where people sat down and prayed, and we cried and we talked. I agreed to take a polygraph with the police station.
So you wanted to take a polygraph?
I wanted to speak to the detectives. I wanted to take a polygraph, and they would not speak to me. They refused to speak to me with my attorney present. So I did not get the chance to speak to them. And then when the polygraph was scheduled, my attorney called me and said they already have a warrant for your arrest. They were not intending on you taking the polygraph, and there are cameras here where they can have you on film being arrested when you show up to take the polygraph. Actually, when my attorney called me, he said, do not come. They have a warrant for your arrest, and they've kind of set up, he said, a perp walk.
Tonya turned herself in. She was arrested, photographed, and printed. She also got her first look at the arrest warrant.
You were accused of molesting 3 young girls.
Yes, correct. There were 2 girls that were friends of my daughters, and one was my own daughter.
Your own daughter. When you saw it, was your own daughter named in this document?
Yes, that was the first time I had seen her name involved in anything with this.
Tonya made bail and knew she needed much more legal help.
You're always reluctant in a case like this. You want to make sure you're comfortable with the case and believe your own client, obviously, first, before you can devote any effort to it. When there's 1, it's hard. When there's 2, it's harder. When there's 3 children that are saying it, your natural presumption is, well, they're like everybody else.
You knew this was going to be tough.
Absolutely. And then I met Tonya, and it didn't take more than about 15 minutes, I would say, to convince me that this was completely a witch hunt.
Tonya and her legal team got to work. The charges came as a result of complaints from 2 parents and Tonya's ex-husband. There was bad blood there, and her relationship with one of the complaining moms was rather strained.
First of all, it's very rare to hear a female defendant that is accused of this type of crime. Secondly, obviously the fact that it was her own daughter that was part of the accusation made it more salacious. And then I think thirdly, who I call the spearhead of this, Sandra, is from a very prominent family in this town. And I think everyone latched onto that, and it became what it became.
And then there was the repeated questioning of the children.
They want to please the person they're talking to. And the more times you say, are you sure nothing happened, the more they begin to think, well, maybe the answer they're looking for is that something did.
Maybe something did happen.
Particularly with the younger children like this. Tonya's child actually never said anything that we ever could equate to that should have been a crime or a charge.
It took nearly a year, but Tonya was indicted and hit with a stunner, 22 counts of child molestation.
Reading the indictments make me nauseated. The things that they claimed in there are just disgusting, and And anybody that did do those things should go to prison for the rest of their life. But I did not, and to see my name and to see my daughter's name and these other children's names was very, very upsetting. But on the other hand, it told us what we needed to do, how we needed to do it, and how we needed to get there.
In Chickanauga, Georgia, a respected kindergarten teacher has been charged with the ugliest of crimes.
You were accused of molesting 3 young girls.
Yes, correct. There were 2 girls that were friends of my daughter's, and one was my own daughter.
Her arrest and the charges shocked the small town in northern Georgia.
It's exactly that. It's a small town, and everyone sort of knows what's going on, and so this story was the big story long before the national press caught it.
And the story was 22 charges against Craft. From the day Tonya turned herself in to authorities, it was ugly.
They took my clothes off, and they had me bend over, and they had gloves on. And as they did that, I was crying so hard, I was shaking, and the lady even apologized and said, "I have to do this." And I said, "I know," and I was always very respectful, but it was the most humiliating thing and horrible thing that ever happened.
Facing a maximum of 400 years behind bars, Tonya's trial began. The horrid charges spoken to the jury for the first time.
Aggravated child molestation, aggravated sexual battery, and child molestation.
The prosecutor constructed his case on testimony from cops, experts, and parents of the alleged victims.
And she said she touched her bottom and her Lucy, which is what she calls her private area.
But something else was revealed, the ugly relationship between Tonya and Sandra Lamb. Sandra was something of a power player in town, and her child was one of the alleged victims.
She said that Miss Tonya had done stuff to her, and I mean, she was like hysterical at that point. She was, and I was in total shock.
Crime Watch Daily reached out to Sandra Lamb and got no response, but Tonya Craft's lawyer thought it smelled like a setup.
Some people would say, could it really be the fact that this woman was ticked off enough to go after Tonya?
And I asked that question myself. I think it's a combination. I think it was malice that caused her to repeatedly question. And understand this, her daughter said nothing had happened originally.
Well, Sandra, she seems like she's got an anger issue. I don't know why. She wouldn't let nobody push her around. She was real aggressive to the defense, especially.
Sandra Lamb stood out to the jury. Then the kids took the stand.
How did that affect you, seeing those children be marched in there one by one?
Tore me up. I don't like kids being mistreated, and it seemed like that's what it was.
Juror Luther Lawson was flat out disturbed by how the prosecution treated the children.
The way they were questioned on the stand, it just seemed like they were trying to drag something out of them.
What do you think broke your heart the most with having those kids on the stand?
The interview with Tonya Skit. When she broke down and she told them that all she did was put medicine on my bottom. I've done that to my grandkid.
I wanted her not to have to be there, but I had no choice to go through with it. The only way for her not to be put on the stand, because I didn't put her there, was to just give up and not have the trial and go to prison for something I didn't do.
Then, in a dramatic decision, Tonya decided to take the stand herself.
I was one of the ones the night before she took the stand who told her she didn't have to do it, that I felt at that point we had made our case.
And I told them that I absolutely was going to take the stand for two reasons. One is I'm just a normal person, and those jurors are normal people. And if I was them, I would want to hear me say I did not do it.
What are you doing up on that witness stand?
I'm here because I have been falsely accused.
Don't you know that you have a right to sit there and make them prove every element of their case?
Yes.
Don't you know that they're supposed to not have to hear from you?
Yes.
Prosecutors tried to paint an ugly picture.
Are you not disputing the fact that there was, in your relationship with Joel, some simulated lesbian or girl-on-girl pornography? You got plastered. You were drunk.
I had too much to drink, yes.
You never grabbed their breasts. You just commented on them being big.
Correct.
There were moments of what I would call uncomfortable questions, not because she had done anything wrong, but just because they wanted to take every incident from her life and make it into something that it wasn't. And she stood there, she faced it, she answered, she never backed down.
You wear thong underwear, right?
Yes, I do.
Tonya never lost her cool.
And so, when we've heard all this about what a busy schedule you had, and you were asked the question, when did you fit in molesting children? Well, you didn't really have to make a lot of room in the schedule to do that, did you?
I didn't molest any children, and I didn't have a video camera, unfortunately, on me 24/7.
Juror Lawson paid close attention.
She got on there and she seemed like she was a pretty honest person.
After 5 weeks, the jury got the case, and Tonya just wasn't sure things would go her way.
I went to a local hotel. I went next door. I ordered lasagna. I just remember that for whatever reason. I went in, I watched TV because I felt like that would be the last time I could choose what I was watching on TV. I ate, I showered, I slept in a bed that I felt like was going to be the most normal bed that I would ever have again.
2 years after she was arrested and charged with 22 counts of molesting children, Tonya Craft steels herself for the verdict.
The judge handed it to the individual in that particular courthouse that read the verdicts. And he started with count number 1.
We, the jury, find the defendant. Count number 1, not guilty.
21 more times she heard those words.
Count number 5, not 8, not guilty. Count 12, count 16, count number 20, not guilty.
Whenever they read count 22, not guilty, I about passed out.
Count number 22, not guilty.
My body just, with everything that I had been working on and had been hoping and praying for, and my attorney, one of my attorneys, Scott, was next to me and actually, grabbed me, and then we left the courtroom. I felt the same shock and disbelief that I felt when they showed up at my door approximately 2 years before. It was just, I couldn't believe it because I had prepared myself for the worst.
Tonya was free, but there was collateral damage.
Everybody was just overjoyed, and I was overjoyed to a point. But without my children, they could have locked me up forever.
It had been 2 long years since she had seen her own daughter, the same daughter who had testified against her.
What was that reunion like for you?
It was bittersweet because I knew that my daughter had been told things that weren't true. I knew that there was a light in her that needed to be kind of rekindled, but it wasn't going to be done in one sitting, and it was supervised, so there was a therapist involved. It was a very therapeutic setting. I just sat on the couch and I cried when I saw her, and she brought me a tissue, but she sat kind of across the room and we just talked, and I just asked about school and, just as normal of a conversation as we could have. And I knew that I wanted to go up and hug her and pick her up and run out of the room and take her home and never let go. But 1, I knew that couldn't happen, and 2, I had to let her come to me and let her feel safe and comfortable and let her heal in the way she needed to.
Tonya didn't go back to teaching. Instead, she wrote a book about her personal nightmare called Accused. The former kindergarten teacher actually went back to school herself, law school. Ironically, she now works for the prosecutor's office in Chattanooga, Tennessee. But the most important thing in Tonya Craft's life today is what it's always been, her children. And we're happy to report they are back with their mom.
And we do want to stress that we actually reached out to the prosecutor's office here. Sandra Lamb and the father of the other alleged victim all have declined to comment or have simply not returned our calls. Well, here now with me to talk about both sides of the law on a very difficult case like this one is former prosecutor Lonnie Coombs and also criminal defence lawyer Mike Cavalluzzi. Guys, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
I talk about it being a difficult case, Lonnie. It most certainly is, and it's had devastating consequences for so many people involved. Yes. The question I want to ask you, how did they even pursue this case? How did it make it to trial?
Well, remember at the time they filed the charges, what evidence did they have? They had not one little girl, not two little girls, but 3 little girls come forward and say that they had been touched inappropriately. Then we have law enforcement, the detectives who talked to them who believed it. We have child advocates who worked with them who believed what they said. So it wasn't just 1 or 2, disgruntled parents. It was all of these different people who heard the information and believed that there was enough evidence there to go forward with the case.
Do you agree with that, Mike?
Look, not only was Tonya Craft found not guilty of these charges, she was exonerated, and the allegations against her were found to be baseless and false. So no, the charges should never have been filed. So when Lonnie says we have 3 accusers, these 3 little girls making these allegations, she needs to also remember that each of those 3 little girls, when first asked about whether they had been inappropriately touched, all said no.
Well, as Mike knows, when you're working with children this young, you're talking about 4, 5, 6 years old. That's not even like an 8, 9, or 10-year-old. You're talking about very young children. And when people are having to interview them and get very difficult information out, sometimes it takes some time for them to build up rapport and be able to talk to them.
But in the court of public opinion, people who have looked closely at the case, I don't think anyone challenges a conclusion, including you, Lonnie. I don't think anyone challenges the conclusion that Tonya Craft did not commit these crimes.
Now, though, just to briefly interrupt, when you break this down, when you step back and you look at what happened here, the question becomes, how do they be held to account for making these false allegations? Is it civilly that you have to look at some sort of avenue of recourse here?
Tonya Craft filed a multi-million-dollar civil lawsuit in federal court naming virtually everyone involved in the investigation, as rightfully she should have done. This is a lesson that we should have learned in famous cases out of Kern County, out of Washington, and the McMartin case, and we don't learn the lesson. And so when Lonnie refers to these 3 girls and they're simply telling these stories, the lesson we need to learn, Lonnie, is that children are easily suggestible. They should not be so immediately believed because they are so easily suggested. There are famous studies about how easy it is to lead a child from the truth right into a lie.
Lonnie Coombs, Mike Cavalluzzi, thank you so much for your insight today.
Thank you.